When I was teaching English abroad in Japan, out of the many schools that I taught at, I should first give some context for that actually. As an English teacher, I had a couple of main schools that I went to multiple times a week. Those were the academically focused schools, but there were also a variety of other schools that I went to, kind of on an irregular basis, more as a cultural exchange sort of thing instead of being a regular English teacher. One of the regular schools that I went to was the School for the Deaf at the region where I was at. And it's real interesting because there were not large classes. There were only a handful of students there, but they were very academically focused and they actually were very skilled despite having hearing impairment. And that's partly because the English teacher at that school was like truly passionate about language learning, and she was a really good teacher. She switched out on my third year. She switched out for another school, which is a problem in my eyes. That's in the Japanese school systems. They switch out teachers. They shuffle them across different posts. It's pretty common in a lot of office jobs to shuffle up the office workers from one place to another. Supposedly it goes back to how nobles and lords would shift around so that they would purposefully move them around so that no one would form alliances and rise as one to overtake a certain area, though that implementation never expanded into Hokkaido, even during the Warring States period. But it goes to show how much a stickler people are for tradition sometimes, where this is just the way that you do things. It doesn't matter that the students are going to have to get used to a new teacher. The teacher's going to have to get used to the new environment of that school. And me going from one school to another, I know that there are little differences between how things work, what the expectations are, what the atmosphere of the school is. Like at the School for the Deaf, that's a completely different atmosphere than at the technical school, at the Kogyo. Kogyo is, it's like a school focused on shop class, basically. They're not academically focused, they're more focused on like practical, get your hands dirty jobs like electrical work. It's a different atmosphere to that than to an academic school where everyone's focused on college entrance exams and doing real well on their high school exams. That's another big cultural difference in Japan is the just how heavy the focus is on testing in high school. But I'm going on quite a tangent here. I wanted to talk about the School for the Deaf because there was a very interesting conversation that came up a couple of times. There was one student where he was his final year at this school, and he was going on to, he was aging out for that school. It was his last year, and he's going to be moving to a new place. So he's talking with some of his friends, and they're also looking to possibly move around for some of his older friends moving to college. Others might move regions to get to a more prestigious academic school even. And one thing that comes to mind is their skill with foreign languages, because your skill with English is something that's tested for high school entrance exams and for college entrance exams. And so the conversation that he had was, well, how many languages do you know? because also in that area, there were not a lot, but there were some people that also knew Russian. And this student at the School for the Deaf, he had some relatives that knew a fair amount of Russian. And so he was at least familiar with some of the basics. I don't know if he could read Cyrillic or not, though. But anyway, so they asked, how many languages do you know? And he's like, oh, I only know Japanese. That's like this polite answer. But when he brought that up, the main English teacher was trying to encourage him a lot, and she said, you should really count sign language as a true language that you know, because languages aren't just spoken. This is the crux of the discussion that I'm trying to get at, is that sign language is a real language and should be recognized as such. It's not spoken, it is shown through motions. It's a kinesthetic language rather than an auditory one. It's a visual kinesthetic. Labels don't really matter when it comes to, well, what does this mean? Or what is that? It's a different experience than a verbal language. And I think that I've learned the most from diversifying not just into other spoken languages, but there's such a significant difference of the experience itself in expressing communication without words, but with a different medium of symbols that you use through sign language. And it's odd because not many people think about sign language that much. But if you are a polyglot, if you are someone who's collecting languages, even though I have some issues with the idea of collecting languages just for the prestige of it or bragging rights or something like that. And I'll admit part of that's out of envy because I can't into that very strongly. I just don't have that strong of a connection as some people who are truly passionate about so many different languages. I can only really focus into a handful of things, a handful of aspects of the language. It doesn't grip me with the entirety as would be necessary to warrant all the time, effort, and expenditure that it would take to be a true polyglot. It doesn't. I wish that language study energized me as much as it does for some people. When I study sign language, especially when I'm around other signers, it's such a... I don't want to say it's such an emotional experience. It's an experience that you feel in a completely different way because it necessitates face-to-face interaction. You can't do sign language over the phone. It's very personal, and there's such a lack of this personal face-to-face interaction in daily conversation, daily life. It feels like it fulfills something that's largely missing from the atomized culture that we have today. Part of why you would study foreign languages is getting exposure to new experiences and new perspectives. And when you have to use an entirely different paradigm of communication, expression through symbolic gestures as opposed to words, symbolic words, then that forces you to take a different perspective than what you would have normally. And it changes your experience of a social exchange at the same time. So all that's to say, back when I was in Japan, some of the conversations I had with talking to people from different walks of life or encountering people from different walks of life really opened my eyes to different things. And one of them is sign language is its own language. But when you're in such a microcosm, when you're in a culture that is not so widespread, like there aren't that many signers out there, just generally speaking, there are, if you look at like the numbers of how many people know sign language across the world, there's a significant number. But you're not likely to find someone who knows sign language if you ask if you go to the grocery store and ask everyone along every single aisle. You could go through the entire place and probably not find a single person who can do sign language. Similarly, and actually statistically, if I'm in America and I go ask a whole bunch of random people if they know sign language or if they know Japanese, more people statistically will know sign language than Japanese, because Japanese is such a rare second language, second or other language for people to take on in the American context. Yeah, that's a good place to stop. I really enjoyed studying sign language. I still enjoy studying sign language, though right now I'm trying to get my act together when it comes to writing. And it always seems, that's a conversation for another time. It always seems like I'm trying to get my act together when it comes to writing. But there's an immediate satisfaction that comes from fulfilling a social need that's going unmet by having the personal interaction, the personal face-to-face interaction that is part of signing culture. And I wish that more people could get in touch with that. It is a kind of intimacy. It's a very basic level of intimacy to be comfortable in understanding another person's communications in a face-to-face interaction. I actually have a good point to end on. Is the other day I was going around to garage sales. I'm not going to rant about garage sales again, I promise. But I realized when I was talking to a couple of people, I was explaining, well, what are you looking for? What are you trying to do? Some people are, interested in, why are you going to garage sales? And they're looking to get rid of whatever they have on hand in their stock, you could say. And so I'd explained it several times that day, where I'd kind of fallen into a rut of explaining, oh yeah, I'm trying to do this really simple home project where I'm making a homemade rock tumbler. And I explained, I'm looking for an electric motor, and I hope I don't shock myself because I'm not all that skilled with wiring or running things with electricity too well. So, I have a little bit of levity to it, but I realized this was like the fourth or fifth person that I'd explained this to. So I'd gotten into a rut with it, and I realized throughout the whole explanation, I was probably talking to them for 10 minutes, maybe. And I didn't look directly at them for that entire 10 minutes. Part of it was because they were masked up, and it's bothersome. It's anxiety striking to stare at someone that has their face covered. You're not getting social stimulation from someone who cannot emote, or if they do emote, then you cannot see through this thing that is a physical barrier to the expression that cannot escape that physical barrier, because I'm not Superman and I can't see through walls with X-ray vision. And in a way, not to put too fine a point on it, but today, in more ways than one, we are putting up walls to social interaction. The social trends of modern culture, with many political eggshells, for example, but also top-down mandates of what the new normal is, has taken away an aspect of humanity, of personal interaction that's just not there anymore. it's odd that I have this nostalgia looking back on teaching at the deaf school, and even with the meager amount of American Sign Language that I introduce here and there, just how meaningful those interactions were. That was really dynamic because we were using spoken Japanese, spoken English, Shuwa, which is Japanese Sign Language, and ASL, American Sign Language. Yeah. Now I have a great positive note to end on. The students at the deaf school in Japan were the best at spelling. They were excellent at reading and spelling. Well, they were very visually focused, so reading was a big aspect that we focused on. Like, we didn't focus on pronunciation, like, at all. We realized, yeah, that's going to be hard to distinguish things with hearing impairment, so we're going to focus more on reading. And they excelled very well at it. But they were excellent with spelling. Now, English is notoriously difficult to spell, and it's also, like, when you encounter words where it's like, wait, how do you spell that? Then, I'd go up to the chalkboard and I'd spell it out if they were, like, doing some writing exercise or whatever. But on the spot, you can explain what letters something is used by signing out American Sign Language for, like, ABC or whatever for spelling a word out. So you don't even have to write something down to explain the spelling when you have the visual aid of using your hand to spell things out. And that just made things quicker in this sort of way, where it was real easy to do that. Because also verbally saying especially the vowels A, E, and I, and U, not so much O would be more easily understood, but like if I said it's spelled with an E, then they would write down an I, because in Japanese you pronounce the I sound as E. Like the word for breath is iki, to breathe, breathing. So iki, or that actually has a couple of meanings. It could be iku for to go or to move. But that I sound, that initial I sound in Japanese is called E, which is not the American E, like evil. Like, I don't know, why can I not think of E words off the top of my head? Because I'm thinking in Japan, I'm thinking of edamame beans off the top of my head. Now I got a craving for edamame. That was a great snack food back in Japan. Though with my current diet, which I have fixed my diet largely, I cannot have significant amounts of phytoestrogens, which there's certain legumes, certain beans that are like soy-ish, like edamame beans, that will mess with my flow, bro. It lowers testosterone, basically. That's the easy way of explaining it. Though it's much more nuanced than that. But anyway, I think it would be really cool if in a foreign language class, for like an English class, that to mix things up, but also to serve a practical purpose, that when teaching spelling or teaching basic things about writing, that I'd introduce that with some American Sign Language so that it would be easier to explain spelling things in the future by using the American Sign Language hand gestures, hand symbols, to explain spelling. I don't know how much I would focus on that now, because a lot of the language exchange stuff I do online it's focused on speaking, and there's not so much with writing. I suppose if I ever got back into a more formal academic English teaching, that I would consider that more with lesson planning, especially if there's something like an eikaiwa, where it's like trying to focus on novelty and variety, which is not... See, I have a thing against novelty for novelty's sake, but I do like having a bit of novelty that can be practically applied, which I think, like, spelling is boring, but having spelling as like a topic introduced with spelling through sign language, now that can be pretty interesting. Yeah, I think that's a good one to end on. And if you're wondering what this music is, it's from the Drakengard series and the Nier series, where the main composer is Keiichi Okabe. So thank you for listening, and I hope this might encourage you to have more confidence that sign language should count as a language, and it really adds a lot to your perspective and to your experience. I would even argue it adds a lot to your humanity to interact through sign language and to have that perspective of just how important it is to have face-to-face interactions with others. And I hope that it would open your eyes up a bit to recognize those feelings when you are able to interact with people face to face. Thank you for listening.